Emperor Napoleon didn't just conquer Europe, he turned it into a flow of resources. Entire nations marched under his shadow. Armies numbering in the hundreds of thousands crossed borders with precise movements. Kingdoms fell, treaties were signed, maps were redrawn. But behind the dramatic scenes of the battlefield lay something colder, more calculated. Napoleon built a war machine that forced Europe to finance its own submission. Welcome to History of Finance, where money, power, and history collide. And nothing is ever as simple as it seems. At the height of his power, Napoleon controlled or dominated territories stretching from Spain to Poland, from the North Sea to southern Italy. At one point, the Grande Armée mobilized more than 600,000 soldiers. Operations on this scale had never been seen before. Feeding, equipping, paying, and sustaining such a force required enormous resources. But here was the problem. When Napoleon seized power in 1799, France was not rich. It had suffered financial collapse. To understand how Napoleon financed his empire, you have to start from the bottom. By the late 1780s, the French monarchy was drowning in debt. The 7 Years' War had been extremely costly. Support for the American Revolution added roughly $1.3 billion in debt to the royal treasury. By 1788, interest payments consumed more than half of royal revenues. The monarchy did not fall because of ideology alone. It collapsed because it could not pay its debts. Then came the Revolution, and a financial event that nearly destroyed the country. In 1790, revolutionary leaders issued assignats, paper currency backed by confiscated church lands. At first it looked clever. Convert seized assets into money, inject liquidity into the market, stabilize the economy. But the government printed far too much money. By 1795, more than 45 billion livres in assignats were in circulation. Inflation spiraled out of control. The currency collapsed, prices soared, savings disappeared, trust evaporated. France experienced something close to extreme inflation. This was the nation Napoleon inherited after the coup of 18 Brumaire in 1799, a country exhausted by internal terror, economic instability, and constant war. Napoleon understood a fundamental truth. Permanent war cannot be sustained on monetary chaos. His first move was not invasion, it was stabilization. In 1800, he established the Bank of France. In 1803, he introduced the franc germinal, backed by gold and silver. Tax collection was centralized. Corruption was gradually reduced. Government finances were disciplined. Inside France, he created a surprisingly balanced fiscal structure. Budgets were often balanced, and revenues became predictable. But then came the real turning point. Napoleon refused to place the full cost of continuous war on the French people. He pushed the bill outward. After every major victory, he imposed heavy war indemnities on defeated states. After Austerlitz in 1805, Austria was forced to pay about 40 million francs. In 1807, Prussia paid roughly 100 to 20 million francs. A single indemnity could finance months of warfare. The model was ruthless but effective. Conquer territory to impose indemnity to shift occupation costs onto the defeated state to finance the next war with extracted resources. War financed war. This was not simple looting, it was structured economic extraction. Napoleon turned conquest into cash flow. But the system had a mathematical condition: constant expansion. As long as victories continued, revenue flowed. Once expansion stopped, the liabilities remained. Then came his most ambitious economic weapon, the continental system. In 1806, after failing to defeat Britain at sea, Napoleon attempted to destroy it economically. European trade with Britain was embargoed. On paper, it was bold. In reality, it harmed Europe itself. Smuggling increased. Black markets expanded. Trade contracted. When Russia began violating the system, one of the most disastrous financial decisions in history followed: the Russian campaign of 1812. Around 600,000 troops were assembled, the largest army not just of France, but of Europe, and it became a financial catastrophe. Supply lines collapsed, winter arrived, the army was rapidly destroyed. Fewer than 100,000 soldiers returned in fighting condition. No indemnities, no new revenue, only cost. Napoleon's model depended on victory. The Russian disaster broke that chain. Indemnities stopped. War expenses returned to France itself. Britain, meanwhile, followed a different model. Not conquest, but debt markets. War was financed through long-term government borrowing. Even when debt exceeded 200% of GDP by 1815, it remained sustainable, because the system relied not on expansion, but on institutional trust. Napoleon's system was fast and immediately effective, but fragile. Britain's system scaled slowly, but grew stronger. That difference reshaped Europe after 1815. Napoleon was removed from power and exiled. This time France was forced to pay 700 million francs in war reparations. The empire that once collected indemnities was now buried in debt. The lesson was clear. Military power without financial sustainability is fragile. Napoleon was not economically irresponsible. He stabilized the currency. He modernized taxation. But his strategy rested on a single assumption: that conquest would generate endless economic revenue. It was a model of expansion with no plan to stop. History shows us this. Not the strongest army, but the strongest economic system endures. Even today, great powers attempt to shift costs outward. Sanctions, trade policies, reserve currency systems. But when trust breaks, the cost returns home. Napoleon learned this lesson after Russia. History does not punish ambition, it punishes unsustainable economics. The Napoleonic era was not only about cannons, soldiers, and cavalry. It was about balance sheets and bond markets. The true empire is not the one that conquers the most land, but the one that masters money and economics. If this gave you a new perspective, subscribe. History holds the answers. I'll show you where to find them.